Huge James Bond news today. So there was an article today about how Michael G. Wilson and Barbara Broccoli, who run Eon, Everything or Nothing, basically own the James Bond franchise. They are ceding creative control of James Bond to Amazon and MGM, who sort of own the distribution rights of that, which is massive. We haven't had a James Bond movie in, 5 years now? And finally, it looks like something is going to change. So if you want to know my thoughts about it, stay tuned and we'll have a little chat. Hi guys, it's me, and this is such big James Bond news that even I couldn't sit around and not make a video. Whew, yeah, the word is out, and Michael G. Wilson and Barbara Broccoli, who have been the showrunners of James Bond since GoldenEye, I think that's when Barbara Broccoli took over. Yeah, they are ceding control of the James Bond franchise, of the creative control of James Bond, to Amazon and MGM, who distribute the James Bond films, which is massive. And you know, it's difficult to know how to feel about this. On the one hand, it has been really deeply frustrating, the fact that we haven't had a new James Bond movie in 5 years. I mean, they could have knocked out one with Idris Elba like 3 times over, and we would have loved it. We'll take any James Bond we can get at this point. And so, you know, when I heard this news, my first thought was, oh wow, well, that means we might finally actually have some movement in the James Bond franchise. We might actually look forward to another movie eventually. But on the other hand, you know, is this a good thing or a bad thing? And that's interesting. It's very interesting. I think Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson, to a certain extent, they get a certain amount of flack. I think for one point is the fact that they haven't made a James Bond movie in 5 years. I mean, they used to knock them out, you know, one every other year. And James Bond isn't rocket science. It's a wonderful formula that you can change the different levels on and customize. But there's a formula that you have when you make a James Bond movie, and it's just really deeply frustrating that they didn't just say, okay, let's go back to the formula and make a James Bond movie. Because, you know, as Bond fans, we're not that fussy. David Zaritsky always says that Bond films are like pizza. You know, there's really great pizza and there's not so great pizza, but all pizza is pretty much good. We enjoy all of it. And I think it's also worth pointing out that for all of the criticism, Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson did usher in 2 fantastic debuts. I mean, when GoldenEye launched, that just reinvigorated the whole James Bond franchise. It just reinvented James Bond. Pierce Brosnan was fantastic. All of Pierce Brosnan's films, with the arguable exception of Die Another Day, which I personally love, were fantastic movies. And yeah, they really captured something magical with that. And then they did it again with Casino Royale when they brought Daniel Craig in. And you had Casino Royale and you had Skyfall. Those were just 2 of the best James Bond movies ever made. Although on the other hand, Quantum of Solace and Spectre were arguably 2 of the not so great Bond movies ever made. And No Time to Die, you know, there's a huge debate about that. I personally really enjoyed it. It made water come out of my eyes. But yeah, there is no arguing the fact that Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson have done a really, really fantastic job with some of the creative choices that they have made. And while there have been some missteps, you know, I think that they really, really took what James Bond is to heart and tried to do the best they could with the franchise. But you know what? They've reinvented James Bond twice now. How do you do it a third time? And I think that's really tricky. I was thinking of it just from a storytelling perspective. People are always asking me, "Oh, Roland, you're a writer. Would you like to write a James Bond book?" And I'm like, that would actually be really, really tricky, because there are so many James Bond books and so many different spins on things. How would you create something that satisfies us fans of the franchise and hits all the beats, the formulaic beats that we demand in a James Bond movie, yet make it new and interesting and exciting? So many different creative choices you could have, and I can understand that's probably like a roadblock for Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson. They're probably like, what do we do next? And I know that they have a lot of other stuff going on. Barbara Broccoli is very into philanthropic work and making very good, worthy movies and plays and stuff like that. So James Bond, I think, isn't her focus anymore. So I think it's kind of good that it moves into the hands of people who actually want to do something with this franchise. And Amazon is an interesting one because, on the one hand, Amazon have taken creative properties like Lee Child's Jack Reacher and made utterly fantastic adaptations. The Terminal List by our buddy Jack Carr. I mean, I think I heard it. I was listening to David Zarisky chat to Jack Carr, and you heard about like Jack Carr sent a book to Chris Pratt, and Chris Pratt read it and liked it and used his connection. So there's real synergy between the original works that inspired these adaptations and the adaptations themselves. And so Reacher and The Terminal List are just fantastic, fantastic shows. But on the other hand, you've then got stuff like The Rings of Power, which is, an adaptation of Lord of the Rings, which I haven't really watched. I kind of grew out of swords and sorcery a bit when I was a teenager. But my general understanding is that it is not great. If you are a fan of the original source material, there's an awful lot of stuff that's kind of like there's a different agenda, a different focus going on with the creation of this show, and so that is something that a series of a franchise that perhaps Amazon has mishandled. So it's like, which way would they go? And that's tricky. And the other thing that's tricky is what Eon has always done, and what Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson really, really tried to safeguard, I think, is the magic of what a James Bond film is. I mean, a James Bond film is traveling the globe and having reoccurring cast members coming back and reoccurring characters, and this weird, like, disjointed timeline that's kind of the same character but not quite. There's something weird and esoteric and magical about what James Bond movies are, and I'm almost a little concerned about taking that magical ridiculousness that we as James Bond fans absolutely adore and putting it in the hands of, like, dare I say it, grown-up filmmakers who have their own understanding about things. I mean, what happens when you take the chaotic magic of James Bond movies and put them into a more rigid and traditional production structure? I don't know. Will you lose some of the magic? Will it get better? I don't know. The creative choices you go for. Do you go for a period piece? Everyone's going on about a period piece. And if you're going to stick true to the source material, period piece sounds good. But again, part of what makes James Bond movies fun is that they are achingly contemporary. They're always, what is it? Cubby Broccoli used to say, "This isn't science fiction, this is science fact." And there is this certain conceit of contemporary relevance to James Bond movies, which I think you would lose if you set them in the past. But at the same time, the world is very different now, and where is there space for a character like James Bond? It's really, really tricky to know how you would do that properly. Another question for me, a big question, is what about distribution? Because I would hate James Bond to be from like a tentpole cinema release that happens every few years to just another movie that gets thrown up on streaming. Would they have offshoots? Would you have like the James Bond tentpole movie and then the Moneypenny series or the Q mysteries like they're doing with the books at the moment? Would that be a good thing? Would that be a bad thing? Everyone's so keen to like build universes, like the MCU and DC are trying to do right now, and it's like, is that always a good thing? Part of the magic of James Bond is the fact that it is a consistently inconsistent timeline, and characters and events are referenced even though it doesn't make any sense in the timeline or chronology of the characters. It's difficult. The James Bond movies don't fit neatly into any particular socket, I think, which is why they're so challenging to get right. But overall, I think it's a good thing. And I think where the opportunity really lies is cinema tends to go through like trends. And one of the things that James Bond has always been good at is going with those trends. I mean, the James Bond spy franchise basically invented a genre. But since then, they've always kind of navigated this weird path through popular culture. And every James Bond film is achingly contemporary because it is relevant to a particular point in time. For example, Live and Let Die in the 1970s was a James Bond movie, but it was a blaxploitation movie. And The Man with the Golden Gun was a kung fu movie. And Moonraker was a science fiction Star Wars movie. And License to Kill was an 80s action movie. And Quantum of Solace was like a Jason Bourne spy movie. Whatever it is in a particular trend in popular culture at the time, the James Bond movies have done a wonderful job mirroring that. And I really hope that's something that continues, but I think that is something that could continue because I believe cinema is hitting a new trend right now. If you watch the trailers for the Fantastic Four and for Superman, is it just called Superman now? I think those are really interesting because we talk about, oh, you've got to go back to the source material. And Superman and the Fantastic Four are two movies made by, two competing houses, both alike in dignity, DC and Marvel. But they are going back to the source material, to the comic books, and getting really, really down and dirty with the original source material. And there's a certain optimism and innocence to what they're creating. And I'm like, you could do with that with James Bond, maybe. Maybe you could go back, not necessarily to the books. And I know you're like, what, Roland? You're the James Bond book guy. And I'm like, yeah, I know. The books, James Bond's kind of, a depressed alcoholic a lot of the time. You could go back to the movies, the original movies that were fun and exciting and contemporary and had ridiculous stunts and wonderful names and were colourful and exotic and exciting. And maybe that's where the focus should be. James Bond movies that just bring back some of the childlike magic that we experienced when we saw them for the first time. And I think one thing that is very, very clear and should be avoided at all costs is any more deconstruction of James Bond. I mean, just like I mentioned all these other James Bond movies that were examples of a particular zeitgeist at that time, The Man with the Golden Gun was a kung fu movie. Live and Let Die was a blaxploitation movie. There was, when Casino Royale came out, there was this like, oh, let's do a prequel, let's do an origin story, let's make it dark and gritty. Batman Begins, I think, was a movie that really started that. And there was this trend of deconstructing heroes, and we deconstructed James Bond to death. I mean, poor Daniel Craig got literally carved up into separate pieces and then blown up into separate pieces at the end of the movies. And it's like, okay, that's great. We've done deconstructing Bond. Let's have Bond as Bond is meant to be. This handsome, charming, suave, slightly devilish, slightly roguish, slightly morally grey character who's very witty and very seductive. Let's go back to that. Let's do what they're doing with Superman. Let's do what they're doing with the Fantastic Four and go back to what we love about the James Bond movies and the James Bond franchise as a whole. Let's go back to the fun and the adventure. And instead of deconstructing, let's just construct. And honestly, I think if that is the goal, Amazon's probably got a much better handle on it than I think Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson do. I think they are honestly, they're done. They put in their time and they produced some really, really great movies. I would say out of all the James Bond movies, all 26 of them, or 25 of them, yes, maybe like more than half of my top favorites are ones that Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson oversaw. So, they've put in the work and they've earned our love and our respect. But now it's time for something new. And I'm really excited to see what's going to happen and when it's going to happen. So who knows? It's a brave new world. But who else could you ask to help navigate a brave new world than James Bond himself? So, no, those are my 2 cents. I'd love to know what you think. Yeah, come on. Throw a comment down below. Tell me what you think. Is James Bond moving to Amazon and Amazon taking creative charge going to be a good thing or a bad thing? Let me know. I want to hear it. All right. Until next time, I'll be back with another video. Ciao.